Up next in the broadcast, Apple fails to win a permanent sales ban on Samsung products in the United States in the ongoing patent war between the two global tech giants. The government's 45-day punishment for illegal sales tactics on the nation's 3 mobile carriers goes into effect next week. Users hoping to switch phones or carriers may be affected during the sales ban. Lawmakers in Crimea vote to split off from Ukraine to join Russia as U.S. President Barack Obama speaks directly to his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, to find a solution to the crisis. Primetime News begins now.
Good evening to our viewers in Korea and hello to those of you who are watching from around the world. It's Friday, March 7th here in Seoul. I am Yoo Ji-hye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin this evening with the country's longest business suspension in 10 years.
The government has suspended 3 mobile carriers for doing business for 45 days for providing illegal subsidies to lure in customers. Our Laah Hyun-kyung has this report.
It's the biggest business suspension on the country's mobile carriers ever, a strong warning from the government. Calling for fair competition in the nation's mobile telecommunications industry, the Ministry of Science, ICT and Future Planning announced Friday that SK Telecom, KT, and LGU Plus will be banned from signing up new customers and allowing existing users to buy new devices for 45 days. KT, the number 2 player in the market, will face suspension starting March 13th, followed by leading carrier SK Telecom from April 5th. LGU Plus's suspension will be split into 2 separate periods, the first one starting on March 13th. A ministry official says the government had to suspend 2 of the companies simultaneously because the last time the 3 took turns complying with a similar ban, it triggered even more competition as they tried to snatch up one another's customers while the other was out of commission. In January last year, the 3 firms were suspended for enticing customers with illegal subsidies, a long-time, almost customary tactic where they offer to pay in different amounts a huge chunk of what the customers are supposed to pay for mobile devices. Following Friday's announcement, however, industry insiders voiced concerns that the nation's longest-ever suspension will deal a blow to second-tier handset makers such as LG Electronics and Pantech, as well as smaller retailers, rather than persuading the operators to ditch their bad habits. Laah Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korea has repeated its call to North Korea to accept its proposal for Red Cross talks on resuming reunions for families separated by the Korean War.
Seoul's Unification Ministry said Friday it sent a message to Pyongyang saying that humanitarian issues such as family reunions have always been dealt with by the Red Cross. It noted the North had agreed at their previous meeting to hold further rounds of Red Cross talks to discuss such issues. Pyongyang rejected the offer for talks on Wednesday, saying the proper atmosphere has not been created. Seoul says the issue of family reunions should not be linked to political or military tensions. Korea's diplomatic efforts to pressure Japan to take responsibility for its wartime atrocities may be paying dividends.
Japan said it has no plans to make changes to its official apology to the Korean victims, yet asserted that compensation was already settled back in 1965. Connie Kim reports.
Japan's ambassador to the UN in Geneva, Takashi Okada, said Tokyo, contrary to earlier suggestions, has never spoken of reviewing the 1993 Kono statement in which then-Chief Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono apologized to the victims of Japan's sex slavery.
Since then, the position of the government of Japan has not changed at all. The government of Japan has never spoken of reviewing the Kono statement.
Back in Geneva, Okada said the Japanese government had fully compensated the victims through a 1965 treaty that normalized Korea's economic and diplomatic relations after its liberation from Japan. Late last month, Suga said Tokyo would re-examine the testimony given by former sex slaves, as the government at the time did not verify the victims' remarks. Following Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se's remarks on Wednesday, Yoo Yeon-chul, Deputy Chief of South Korea UN Mission, urged Japan to admit to and take responsibility for its military's past use of sex slaves.
The political leaders and government officials of Japan have recently tried to deny the Kono Statement of 1993.
South Korea wasn't alone in criticizing Tokyo for its past actions and current inaction. The North Korean and Chinese ambassadors to the UN said the Japanese government was trying to deny and hide its past wrongdoings. The U.S. ambassador to Japan, Carolyn Kennedy, on Thursday, called on Korea and Japan to improve relations and said the U.S. will do what it can to help. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
And now to the ongoing patent battle between the most recognizable tech giants in the mobile sector. It's good news for Samsung this time, as Apple's request for a permanent U.S. ban on Samsung's smart products has been denied. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
A U.S. court has rejected Apple's request for a permanent sales ban on Samsung products. In a ruling Thursday, U.S. District Judge Lucy Koh said Apple had not presented enough evidence to show its patented features were a significant enough driver of consumer demand to warrant an injunction. Judge Koh wrote that numerous features, such as battery life, MP3 player functionality, operating system, text messaging options, GPS, and processor speed were not tested by Apple for the purpose of litigation to see whether they are highly important to U.S. consumers. Apple had earlier stated that around 23 models of Samsung's older smartphones and tablets, including the Galaxy S4G and the Galaxy Tab 10.1, infringe upon its patents. This ruling comes ahead of another patent trial set to begin later this month, involving newer Samsung phones, and can negatively affect any further attempts by Apple to block the sales of those models as well. In a statement, Samsung said it was pleased with the ruling. Apple has yet to comment. Samsung and Apple have been locked in legal battles over patents across the globe for nearly 3 years. In a separate case in 2012, Apple was awarded more than $900 million by a U.S. court over Samsung, which earned $7.7 billion last quarter. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The head of the Democratic Party, Kim Han-gil, and independent lawmaker An Chol-soo have worked out their differences on the rules for their new political party. Our National Assembly correspondent Kim Han-gil reports on how the leaders will move forward with the merger.
Korea's two main opposition groups have finally laid out a course of action for how they'll form a new coalition party.
Kim Han-gil, the leader of the main opposition Democratic Party, and independent lawmaker An Chol-soo will be the co-leaders of a preparatory committee in charge of establishing the party.
The agreement comes 5 days after main opposition Democratic Party leader Kim Han-gil and an opposition group led by independent lawmaker An Chol-soo announced the merger. Public interest in the planned merger is especially high due to the potential challenge it could pose to the ruling Saenuri Party in the June 4th local elections, which are seen as a confidence vote for the Park Geun-hye administration. An, who announced plans last month to form a party of his own, will be in charge of setting up a third, separate political party with the help of DP lawmakers.
Once preparations for the newly formed party are complete, the DP will immediately merge with it.
The preparatory committee led by An and Kim will have equal number of members from both the Democratic Party and An's new political vision party. Starting next week, the committee will announce a series of rules for the coalition. Kim and An are hoping that their alliance will help them pick up seats at the National Assembly and that the party's pick will win the presidential race of 2017. Kim Han-gil, Arirang News.
Korea's top business tycoons are no strangers to scandals, but we have seen renewed strictness on law-breaking heads of Korea's family-run conglomerates.
Now, President Park Geun-hye's emphasis on corporate reform comes as leaders of familiar business groups, including SK, Hana, and CJ, have stepped down or served time.
Though the public on the one hand applauds conglomerates, it's also grown weary of the misbehavior of its leaders. And for investors, this has turned into concern of owner risk. To explain, here in the studio is Dr. Laah Hyun-kyung, Research Fellow at Korea Corporate Governance Service. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Dr. Yoon, we're seeing a growing number of conglomerates that have become the subject of owner risk. Now, what does that mean, and why is Korea's corporate governance or decision-making system at fault?
In Korea, the line between the management and ownership is not as clear as it is in the United States or Europe. It is common for the founding family of a Korean company to hold controlling number of shares and to be manager of the company. Even if the family owns just only below 10% of the company, they often use their position to retain de facto control by circular shareholding through affiliate. The chaebol's circular ownership is a typical ownership pattern, and controlling shareholders have only minimal ownership position. Actually, I call this pattern as a power without authority.
So in the early phases of industrialization, such a system where there's a strong family ownership structure of a corporation did lead to a lot of economic development. Has that era passed? Is it really outdated now, or is there something that we should still retain?
Well, concentrated ownership or dispersed ownership is to have their own performance advantage and disadvantage, like two sides of the same coin. Controlling shareholders have taken the position of a CEO or board of chairman, or have chosen people to fill those positions. Therefore, controlling shareholders have been able to more closely and effectively monitor officers and employees.
All right, but yet we are seeing more cases of embezzlement and poor decision-making by chaebol owners. Do you see this as a leadership crisis in this generation?
Well, as I mentioned, controlling shareholders have a strong incentive to appropriate the company's asset for their personal benefit because of the huge disparity between cash flow right and voting right. So this imbalance leads to looting of corporation asset by accounting fraud and self-dealing and use of incorporated opportunity. The problem is in determining who can monitor controlling shareholders, family ownership.
So what are some ways to improve the corporate governance structure and to reduce some of this owner risk?
To fix these problems, the circular shareholder system, first of all, in Korea, should be disassembled, or at least I strongly discourage. Controlling shareholders should be encouraged either to sell their holdings in affiliate company, or they should buy shares from the affiliate of the controlled company with their own money. Korea corporate law should require the mandatory separation of the corporation of CEO and board of chairman. Second, Korean corporate law should have the concept of executive officer, and its application should be mandatory. And third, Korean corporate law should require mandatory cumulative voting.
Some good points there. Thank you very much, Dr. Yoon, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang's Sean Lim and Yoo Ji-hye from the heart of Seoul. Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
We're starting a new segment this evening. Every Friday, we'll be looking at some of the hot topics of the week that have been heavily dealt with by our domestic media outlets.
And our Yu Leon will be running down the stories within the press. So, Leon, take it away.
Now, lots of interesting feature stories in this week's papers. I want to start with the Joseon-ilbo, which hosted the 5th annual Asian Leadership Conference earlier this week. Here in this photo, you see former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard on the very far left. And of course, President Park Geun-hye, and next to her, former U.S. President George Bush, who attended the conference to discuss this year's topic, which was the reunification of the two Koreas. Now, experts and academics also came together to discuss reunification. And I want to go straight to this next article from the same paper. And the title up here reads, Reunification Delays Aging Society by 15 years, able to catch up to Japan within current generation. Now, Kwon Gu-hoon, an executive director at Goldman Sachs, said reunification could be a solution for South Korea's aging population and would secure $4 trillion worth of North Korea's underground resources. He also said in just 10 to 15 years, the economy of a unified Korea would equal that of Germany and catch up to Japan soon thereafter. Now, Mark Faber, who famously predicted the Asian financial crisis in the late 90s, was also at the conference. And this is, of course, him in this photo giving a speech. And he says once there are signs of reunification, fund managers from around the world will jump at the chance to invest in Korea, and that Korea's stock market would grow significantly. But experts at the conference did warn that South Korea's rising debt could be a problem, as the cost of reunification could add to it. So if reunification is undertaken with careful preparations, an economic boom may be down the road for a unified Korea. Now let's go on over to an exclusive coverage by the 중앙일보 on Japan's crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant. Now, the headline of this story right over here reads, where Abe said contaminated water was contained, radiation detector goes off, beep, beep, beep. Now, the paper sent out one of their journalists, the man you see right over here, with a special mask and holding a radiation detector to check on this situation at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant 3 years after the disaster. Now, sitting 100 meters away from the nuclear power plant on a boat, the radiation detector showed a reading that was 110 times higher than the normal rate. Surprising, given that this area is within the zone that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had claimed was safe from the effects of radiation. Now, 3 years since the nuclear disaster and still periodic reports of contaminated water leakage. It's about time the Japanese government and the rest of the world deserve an honest assessment of the disaster. Now, finally, let's go on over to Gyeongyang Shinmun, which ran a story on the intensive education system facing children here in Korea. Now, the title reads, Stop by after private institution on the swing alone, bored again at playground. The title, of course, describes a photo right below, which shows a girl playing alone at a playground in Seoul. Now, the paper tells us that the scene pretty much remained the same the entire day. So where are the children then? Let's zoom in closer at this next article right over here, which shows a timetable for a second grade elementary student here in Seoul. Now, Jiyeon's school day ends at about 1:30 p.m., but after just 30 minutes of rest, seen here in yellow, her day begins all over again when she attends an English language academy and taekwondo class. And the time at home after all that spent doing homework. The paper cites experts who say that jam-packed schedules like this, which are common among children, make them more prone to depression and aggressive behavior. A change in the education paradigm seems to be an urgent need. Now that wraps up your look at some of the eye-catching stories in the press this week.
Moving now to some of the top stories on the global front, we go over to our Paul Yee standing by at the News Center.
Paul, let's start with the fast-moving developments out of Ukraine. What's the latest?
Well, Jay, Crimea's Moscow-backed government has set a referendum on whether to reunite with Russia, and that's not sitting well with the Ukraine, the EU, or the U.S. Our Kwon So-ah has more.
Crimea was, is, and will be an integral part of Ukraine. That was the statement by Ukraine's interim prime minister on Thursday in response to the Crimean parliament's vote to bring forward a referendum on March 16th to reunite the autonomous republic with Russia. The US and EU stood with the Ukrainian government in condemning the move, saying the referendum violates the Ukrainian constitution as well as international law. The EU at a meeting in Brussels urged Russia to de-escalate the situation.
Any further steps by the Russian Federation to destabilize the situation in Ukraine would lead to severe and far-reaching consequences for relations between the European Union and its member states on the one hand and the Russian Federation on the other hand, which will include a broad range of economic areas.
The EU talked of sanctions, including travel bans and asset freezes. A cancellation of an upcoming EU-Russia summit was also considered. However, not all EU members are in favor of the proposed sanctions, since they would come at a cost to them as well. The US has already imposed visa restrictions on Russian officials. President Barack Obama told his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin that Russia's violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity had prompted the US to take a number of punitive steps in response. The White House says that during an hour-long phone call Thursday, hours after the Crimean vote, Obama called on Putin to hold direct talks with the new government in Ukraine and urged him to find a diplomatic resolution to the situation. Officials and experts believe that the Ukrainian crisis is no longer one between divided groups within the country, but also a serious issue between the West and Russia. UK Prime Minister David Cameron compared the situation to World War II, saying the slightest miscalculation could see the situation spiral out of control. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Let's now head over to China, where Beijing's top political leaders have gathered for their annual parliamentary meeting. Amid already tense relations between Beijing and Tokyo due to historical and territorial disputes, China's National People's Congress took aim Friday at Japan's infamous Unit 731. Unit 731 was a top-secret research base in the northeastern Chinese city of Harbin in the late 1930s, where brutal experiments were conducted on thousands of POWs and civilians for several years. Chinese delegates called for the ruins of the Unit 731 site to be placed on UNESCO's World Heritage List. Let's move over to Latin America, where Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, has broken up all diplomatic and commercial ties with Panama. Both Bolivia and Cuba came out on Thursday in support of the decision. Maduro announced the move one day earlier, accusing Panama of taking part in a U.S.-led attempt to carry out a regime change in Venezuela. The decision comes after Panama requested a meeting at the Organization of American States to discuss the anti-government protests in Venezuela, which have left 18 people dead. That wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here on Monday.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. Now, almost 2 weeks have passed since the Winter Olympics ended, but Sochi is now bustling with athletes once again as the largest ever Paralympic Winter Games begins over the weekend. A total of 547 Paralympians from a record 45 nations are vying for 72 gold medals in 5 sports, all in a 10-day span. Athletes will compete in alpine skiing, the biathlon, cross-country skiing, ice sledge hockey, and wheelchair curling. Now, the Games open amid the ongoing crisis in neighboring Ukraine, and actually Ukraine had contemplated boycotting the event, but decided Friday to send their 23-person team after all. And moving on to football, here in Korea, the K-League Classic kicks off this weekend with 6 season-opening matches. It all begins where it left off last season. The defending champions, the Pohang Steelers, will host last year's runner-ups, the Ulsan Hyundai Tigers, at the Steel Yard at 2 p.m. on Saturday Korea time for the rematch. And with many teams having made upgrades this offseason, it's set to be an exciting year for football fans. Now shifting gears to the upcoming World Cup in Brazil. The power rankings are out following the latest round of international friendlies. Now let's take a look at the short list. According to Bleacher Report, despite the official world rankings, Brazil comes in at the top spot due to home field advantage, while Spain comes in at a close second. Argentina, Germany, and Italy round out the top 5. Meanwhile, South Korea steps up to 21st after soundly defeating Greece this week, standing below group mates Belgium and Russia and above Algeria. Now let's get to Friday's KBL matchups. In the first game, SK beats Dongbu 79-68. But now let's talk about the game of the night. The league's top 2 teams, the Mobis Phoebus and the LG Sakers, faced off. Both teams are even to start, but LG breaks away for a 12-point edge at halftime. And despite Mobis' Moon Tae-young playing lights out, it's older brother Moon Tae-jong and LG that get the best of it, and they get the win 80-67. And that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
It was a dry day here in Seoul, and there were multiple reports of forest fires today.
That's right. For details, let's turn things over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, fill us in.
Well, guys, officials say that the fire that broke out in Jeollabuk-do province burned a total of 6 hectares, and it took 5 hours to put it out due to strong winds and dry conditions. Now, it has been 3 days since a dry weather warning has been issued, and that remains in effect in most parts of the country. The humidity level in Seoul has increased to 58%. However, considering the fact that the levels in the Sahara Desert are at around 10%, the air remains very dry in some parts of the country. Currently, we're seeing clear skies nationwide. However, clouds will move in the central regions late tomorrow night. This will lead to light passing snow showers in the central regions on Sunday. Other than that, temperatures will get back to the seasonal average range starting tomorrow afternoon. Taking a look at tomorrow's readings, Seoul starts off the day at -2 degrees with a high of 8. Meanwhile, Daegu and Busan reach the low teens. Moving on to other regions, Daejeon and Jeju make it to 9 degrees while Dokdo tops out at 4. Back to you guys.
Thanks, Bo-kyung. And that's our broadcast on this Friday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hae in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.